Are you inspired yet? So I will be talking today what, or rather, who took me from that very beginner's level to this level of playing violin. A tourist is walking the streets of New York, and he asks New Yorker, "Excuse me, how to get to Carnegie Hall?" And he hears the answer, "Practice, practice, practice." But is practicing one and only thing that takes us to Carnegie Hall? No, it is not. It's actually the mentor, the initial inspiration, and the very first teacher who inspires us to pick up such strange instrument that has one stick and four strings, and who teaches us how to operate this thing. If you lock a child in a practice room, let's say 4-year-old, with this very instrument, give him 12 hours to figure out how things work out. And you hope by the end of the day the child will be able to play Chaconne by Bach that I just played. Ain't gonna happen. We heard multiple stories of incredible human geniuses throughout human history. People like Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, people like Ludwig van Beethoven, or incredible virtuoso of violin, Niccolò Paganini. We tend to think that they just emerged on their own, perfectly playing their instruments, just like that. No. No, we know now, through historic research, that there were initial mentors who inspired the very talented children to pick up that instrument. And there were mentors who taught them what's the technique of making any kind of decent sound on that very instrument. In case of Mozart or Beethoven or Paganini, it was their fathers who devoted their life to teach their children. How it was with me? In my case, it was also family. It was my grandfather. He was a great clarinetist and also an amateur violinist. When I was 6, one day he told me, "Joanna, we are going to music school where I'm teaching." I didn't know what he was talking about, but it sounded interesting, so I went with him. I went with him. The next thing I know, I'm passing some hearing tests. If I can clap, if I can sing. And the next thing I know, my grandfather says, "Well, you will be playing violin from today on." I didn't like that news. I wasn't thrilled at all. I saw my grandfather practicing countless hours on his clarinet, and I knew what it takes to master an instrument. I was an extremely resistant child, probably because later on in my life, I found out that my very first teachers in that very music school were not the most inspiring people. They were not. And I think that maybe they did not quite like what they were doing. So, it was not an inspiring environment for me. The only inspiration of mine was my grandfather. But as you know, child rarely takes things well from family members. So, my resistance was growing towards practicing in particular. I did not like spending countless hours alone in practice room mastering scales or etudes. I didn't. At some point, it got so much out of control that I figured out, how can I really escape the practicing schedule? We had a beautiful garden, full of tall trees. I started climbing the trees. I grabbed a book, climbed the tree, spent there 5 hours, came home late at night. Nobody could bring me down. I wasted my practicing time. I did not practice. My family was very loving, and my grandfather was very much trying to make me play violin. So he was thinking and thinking and thinking. And one day, I come back from school, there's no tree. He cut it down. But we have many more trees in the garden. So I started climbing other trees. If it wasn't walnut, the next was cherry. As you can imagine, soon after, our garden had no more trees left. I was left in my practice room, just by myself. So what it took for me, for this very resistant child, to go from that very initial level of twinkle, twinkle, to become a professional violinist. I met 3 amazing people, 3 amazing mentors, 3 fantastic world-class violinists. The very first one, Professor Jadwiga Kaliszewska, I take time to pronounce that name. She's Polish, she taught me in my home country of Poland. The top teacher of violin at the times when I was a student there. She was a very strict lady, extremely demanding, very harsh. Very few students survived through entire studies in her studio, because if you did not strictly follow her orders, you were not good enough. So I was following all her orders religiously. She was like my religion, basically, spending countless hours in practice rooms. But since she wanted to really invest her time in my violin training, I figured that this woman must be onto something. And because she's the very best violin teacher in Poland, maybe it's good to follow her advice. I kind of didn't believe in myself much, but she inspired me to lock myself in the practice room. She was the very first one who made me go to practice room and do it on my own, without anybody bugging me to do it. The very second mentor of mine, my great inspiration, Charles Traeger, fantastic violinist who won, as the only American in communist times, the oldest violin competition in the world that happens to be in Poland, Wieniawski competition. So he invited me to study with him and do my master's degree here at UMass Amherst. The very first lesson that I had with him, he did something that shook my world. Number 1, he handed me the piece of music that when I saw the name and title, I cringed. I always liked to play very energetic, exuberant, virtuoso type of music. He handed me Johannes Brahms' Sonata G major. It's very inward type of music, very melancholic, rather slow, nothing of virtuosity level in there. I didn't like that. But he made me step out of my comfort zone in order to develop my skills further. The second thing that he did, he said, Joanna, I see you in 3 weeks after you learn the piece on your own, and only then we can start talking about making music. I was speechless. I was like, what? In 3 weeks? I just came from a professor who, if I needed, she gave me 3 to 5 lessons per week. Some of those lessons lasted anywhere from 2 to 4 hours. She was closely guiding me and overlooking every single note that I was learning. It was like learning how to swim in a swimming pool with a life vest. Well, this guy throws me into deep ocean and takes the life vest away, and he says, do it on your own. I didn't know if I could do it. But since he was such a fantastic teacher and such incredible violinist whose playing I truly adored, I told him once, please don't teach me, just keep playing. I'll learn enough from that. So I said, maybe I can do it. Maybe I can do it. So he started teaching me how to become independent. He started teaching me how to look for inspirations, not from a teacher, like I was studying with Professor Kaliszewska, but to look for inspiration within myself. He was the mentor who taught me how to teach myself and how to become independent artists who can develop a work of art on their own. my very third mentor, our very own Philip Setzer from Stony Brook University, violinist of the top world-class string quartet, the Emerson String Quartet. 9 Grammy winners. 9 Grammys. More than Lady Gaga, I always say. So far. He took me and started polishing my very advanced skills to take me to the very highest level. But what was even more important than his countless hours spent on mastering my vibrato, or my colors, or how I held my bow, was that after each and every performance that I gave, he came to me to discuss the recital, to talk what was good, what was bad, but always at the very beginning of discussion and always at the very end of discussion, what he said, Joanna, I believe in you. I think you have something important to say. I think you can become a wonderful violinist. I think you can do it. I think you can. I also didn't know what to do with that. I was very brand new, fresh violinist who just started learning things on my own, so still not very secure in the business of music making in terms of violin playing. But since it wasn't just some mediocre violinist from the street who was telling me that I can do it, but a winner of 9 Grammys, I was thinking this guy might be onto something again. So he inspired me to start developing my self-confidence. My self-confidence that I was still lacking. I studied with him for 4 years, and it took entire 4 years to blossom and develop from this violinistic caterpillar into a violinist and full-blown butterfly. But I did it. Years after I finished my violinistic education and myself became a mentor, I was analyzing and thinking to myself, what did it take to make me a really decent violinist? And very quickly I realized that life, my own very life, presented me with a great model of mentorship that was divided into 3 levels. Level 1, Professor Kaliszewska. It's the level of coach. She guides you very closely. She's spoon-feeding you, note by note, patiently, overlooking closely the process of learning, being there always available, being just like your mother. Level 2, the level of advisor, Professor Charles Traeger. He takes me out of my comfort zone in order to further develop my skills. And he teaches me how to become my very own teacher, how to inspire myself just from within. And level 3, it's the level of champion. Professor Philip Setzer is someone who guides you and believes in you, develops your self-confidence, and basically self-empowers you in order to become who I am today. It's a very simple model, 3-level model of mentorship, but I also was thinking about what made this model work. And there are 2 traits that all these 3 fantastic people share. Number 1 is the L word. It's love. All 3 of them love what they do. All 3 of them are completely convinced that being a musician is not a nonsense in nowadays society, that it is an important call, and that we must carry on. So they are very devoted to making sure that there is a next generation of musicians. But they also love the music itself. They're not artificial about it. They just love it. They breathe music. It's in their pores of their skin. The trait number 2, they do what they preach. They're not just teachers sitting in the studio in their comfortable place behind the desk, but they were incredible, amazing, fabulous, world-class performers. So they were teaching me from the point where they, on a daily basis, were going from concert hall to concert hall, and they were playing and performing. They loved it, and they were living what they were preaching. So that's it. That's the end of my lecture. But at the very end, I want to play for you the piece that inspired me. Very short, little, cute, tiny piece of Henryk Wieniawski that inspired me when I was a child. At the times where I was not quite inspired by my very early teachers, that very piece inspired me to keep playing violin because I really wanted to play it well one day.